I think that as the situation is changing, actually, I think there are things now able to be discussed and suggested which were not able to be suggested or discussed even a few years ago. My view is that, I mean, for instance, there's a sort of idiot conversation you can have when it comes to these things, which consists of something like the following. I would say, if this is a bit of a typical BBC question for you, you see. I'd say, John Anderson, but how do we balance the issues between a liberal society and then illiberalism on the other hand? We've had 20 years of that. We've had 20 years of these silly games and navel-gazing parlour games. It's too late to keep playing those games. We have thousands, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people in the UK who have no love at all for the UK, but yet live here. I don't want them to live here. I don't want them here. They came under false pretenses. Many of them came illegally and continue to come illegally, and we don't want them here. And I'm perfectly willing to say that because it needs to be said. If I hated Australia, hated the Australian people, hated Australian history, hated the Australian way of life, broke into the country illegally and spent my time trying to undermine Australia, why should I be in Australia? Why? What would I have brought the country? What benefit? What moral benefit? What financial benefit? What social benefit? The answer is, you'd have brought no benefit. So why just hope that those people are not in large enough numbers and keep your fingers crossed and put it off for another day? I think we have to start saying very clearly, if you don't like it here, go. And if you don't like it here and you intend to make it worse, we will make you go. We stripped citizenship from ISIS members of ISIS who, even if they had British citizenship, we stripped their passports. We need to start doing the same thing with Hamas. We have Hamas leaders in the UK, Hamas members in the UK. I'm calling on the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the Attorney General, Prime Minister and others to start doing this, to start taking the passports away and deporting people who support Hamas in the UK.
Is there the willpower to listen?
If they don't listen now, somebody else will down the line.
Because you were warning in 2017 about the strange death of Europe.
Yes.
You're now warning it's time to get absolutely real and hard-nosed. Is that...
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, we have a couple of choices clearly at this point. One of them is, and I say this metaphorically for the time being, but it's not that metaphorical. One is to stand up, and the other is to beg on your knees. I don't think that the British public should be on their knees begging.
Ja, den gode Douglas blitt militant. Hvem skulle tro det? Det under vekten av det han så og opplevde i Israel. Dokument Forlag utga denne boken som det vises til, Europas underlige død. Den kom vel i 18, den var ute på engelsk i 17, hørte vi.
Had sufficient sense of shame to try and hide what they were doing when they were gassing the Jews and shooting them, dropping them into trenches. Now we're prepared to side with people who don't even have a sense of shame about the butchering of women and children.
Yesterday I watched the raw footage, about an hour of the...
How did you bring yourself to do that?
I was invited to see the raw footage from the 7th of October massacres, and I've seen quite a lot in war zones I've covered, in the flesh as well as in sometimes being shown video of atrocities. I think what I saw yesterday is by some margin worse than anything I've seen before. And I've been in Nigerian villages when a suicide bomber goes into the church on a Sunday and blows everyone up. And then people chase people through the fields shooting them. I've seen enough exit wounds from children's bodies. But the footage of the 7th of October is a level of depravity that, yes, not even the Nazis did. Because the whole time they're massacring, and I think the film was we saw about 10% of all the bodies that Hamas, the people that Hamas killed that day. Throughout the whole thing, the Hamas fighters are in a state of utter elation. Utter elation.
Were the Nazis in a state of utter elation as they gassed the Jews?
Even the descriptions of the Einsatzgruppen, who were shooting Jews in the back of the head in trenches, fall into trenches, grave pits that they'd made the Jews dig for themselves. Even when you read the accounts, both from the very, very few survivors and from those who witnessed it and those who partook in it, say that the soldiers had to actually be, weirdly enough, protected from their acts by getting incredibly drunk in the evenings and trying to forget what they'd been made to do. The Hamas terrorists are utterly elated and delighted by what they're doing. I said this yesterday, but I really don't want to hear Allahu Akbar shouted again on my streets. It's a war cry. The Hamas terrorists are shouting Allahu Akbar all the way through, as they are using a shovel to decapitate a young man. With every blow of the shovel, they shout Allahu Akbar. When they go in to rape and murder all these young women in a room, they're shouting Allahu Akbar the whole time. When they find a young woman hiding under a table, pretending to be dead, and they realize she's alive, and they begin killing her, they're shouting Allahu Akbar all the time. And they're so elated. And they phone home. We've got the telephone calls now. They phone home. One disgusting young Hamas guy shouts from the phone of one of his victims, his father in Gaza, saying, "I have killed with my own hands 10 Jews. Your son has killed 10 Jews." And the mother is put on the phone and they're all shouting Allahu Akbar and they're so proud of him.
Indescribable.
That's what we're facing. And so when the world sees hundreds of thousands of Muslims marching against Israeli actions in the Gaza, they either agree with what Hamas did and like it, and an awful lot do. We have an awful lot of predominantly Muslims in Australia, Britain, Europe, America, who like what I've just described. They're on board with it, and they'd like to do it to the 7 to 8 million Israelis. So people either like that and want it, or they're totally ignorant of this, or they think that in the wake of that, the Israelis should just simply sit back, take it. And I don't think...
Or if they must respond, it should be proportional.
Which, as I always say, as I said in the week since the massacre, would mean that the Israelis should go in and, for instance, take a shovel and behead a young Palestinian man for every Israeli man. Do they really think? Does anyone really think that's what would happen? That would be proportional. Proportional would be a group of Israeli soldiers finding precisely the number of young women in the Gaza that the Palestinians found in the south of Israel, and raping precisely the same number of women, and then abducting them into Israel and spitting on their bodies and much more.
And rounding up a 6-year-old boy. And
that's not what the Israelis are going to do. That's not what they're doing. So fed up of the double standards on all of this. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Muslims have been killed in the last 12 years by Bashar al-Assad and other Muslims in the civil war in Syria. There's no one on the streets of Sydney or Melbourne. There's no one on the streets of London. We have seen hundreds of thousands of people killed in the last decade in Yemen, Muslims being killed. There's no one on the streets of Melbourne. Nobody is standing outside the Sydney Opera House calling gas the Hutu, or gas the Houthi, gas the Shia, gas the... Nobody's marching for the dead Muslims in Yemen. Their co-religionists, we're always told about, care so much about their co-religionists, don't give a damn about their co-religionists. They really don't. Muslims do not love other Muslims. They have no love for them. They have no love for the Palestinian peoples. None. If they had any, the Jordanians would have taken in the West Bank Palestinians, the Egyptians would have taken in the territory they used to run, the Gaza, and own the Gaza, and they would have taken in the Palestinians from the Gaza. Why have the Egyptians made sure that not one Palestinian is allowed to leave Gaza? Why do they make sure that their border wall is tough as anything? What do they mind? One thing: Jews living. Jews living and Jews winning. It hits them deep in their soul, in their psyche. It's an ancient, ancient hatred. Perhaps the most ancient among the monotheisms. And the deepest and the ugliest, the nastiest.